going on, guys? Gannon here, back with another episode of the Captain's Chair. Because the coronavirus is going on right now, I'm hella depressed, and I am definitely behind on these reviews. I'm going to be doing 2 recaps in one today. First off, let's quickly recap Nepenthe. Nepenthe is the 7th episode in the Picard series, and it is the one with the most fan service, pretty much. Riker and Troy are back. Picard goes to the planet of Nepenthe through the Sicarian projector. Nepenthe apparently means, like, in Greek terms, to, like, get better or, like, revitalize yourself, something along those terms. Troy and Riker are there at Nepenthe because they used to have this son you learn named Thaddeus, and he had this really bad neurological disease that couldn't be cured because of the synth ban. It required a positronic matrix, but of course, after the synth ban, can't have any of that synthetic technology around. So ultimately, unfortunately, Riker and Troy's son, Thaddeus, died. We learned, though, he was quite the character, though, extremely intelligent, probably a little bit on the spectrum. He created, like, around 12 languages, including this one that consisted just solely of butterfly flaps, which is a little bit goofy. Soji and Picard arrive on the planet, and they are met by Riker and Troy's daughter, Kestra. Kestra is named after Deanna Troy's long-deceased sister that, if I remember correctly, she never actually met. She just kind of learned about from her mother in a Next Generation episode. Also, Kestra was quoted again in a Deep Space Nine episode. Kestra, very imaginative, different, a little bit quirky, I imagine. Probably similar to Thaddeus in some ways. She's out there gathering herbs and hunting bunny corn so that they could have a bunny corn pizza. Picard, Troy, and Riker have this awesome, really cool reunion. I don't want to go into it much detail, though. Kind of need to, get this out there and done. Some cool details that I thought were interesting about the meeting between Riker, Troy, and Picard. When Picard first meets Riker, he gives him a little pat on the back, and you could see, if you pay attention, that he leaves, like, flour on the back of Picard's shirt, which is a cool little funny detail there. Riker, in the Next Generation, was a fan of actually cooking with individual ingredients rather than using a replicator. It is kind of a hobby of his. So it would make sense that he is down here on Nepenthe making these bunny corn pizzas. Riker says that the soil on Nepenthe has, like, regenerative abilities, so it's very easy to grow things and kind of live on the land out there. The main reason it seems Picard goes to Nepenthe is to get some parenting tips. He's now got Soji as kind of like a companion. He needs to learn to get along with her and earn her trust so that they can complete their mission and save the synthetic world. Picard historically has never been good with children, so I imagine he's definitely not good with, like, young adult to teenage girls. Some of the most complex creatures in the universe. So, of course, he gets a lot of support and advice from Troy and Riker, who are now parents. Another cool thing this episode, Riker did reference the Kzinti, which are a race of cat people that were referenced in the animated series of Star Trek. The animated series of Star Trek is notorious for, like, really not being canon. I think the only episode that you can consider canon is the first episode. I think Gene Roddenberry himself stated that of all the episodes in the animated series, he only really considers the first one to even be able to, like, be canonical in the Star Trek universe. So it's cool, we have another race of cat people that are now canon in the Star Trek universe. We also have the Caitians. I know that you see one of the Caitians on, like, the Starfleet Council in one of the original series movies. So yeah, kind of cool thing right there. At the beginning of this episode, you see Commodore O kind of, like, actually mind rapes, does an unconsensual mind meld on to Dr. Agnes Jurati in order to pour in these very horrific images into her mind with the intention of highly disturbing Agnes Jurati to the point where she basically does anything Commodore O says. I imagine the images that she poured into her mind are so disturbing that, without question, Dr. Agnes Jurati was like, oh yeah, what do I gotta do? We cannot let this happen. So as a result, she really starts freaking the fuck out this episode. There is so much pressure on her as they get closer and closer to Soji. I assume these feelings are coming from the fact that she probably is going to have to do something bad again. I think she feels like she has the responsibility that she needs to terminate Soji. So this episode, she was really, like, freaking the hell out. And then also the Romulan was on their tail, and Chris Rios was even going as far as to suspect Rafi, which, come on, Chris Rios, you are totally being blinded by the pussy right there, dog. You've known Dr. Agnes Jurati for, like, a week, and you've known Rafi for, like, hella long time. Dr. Agnes Jurati then injects herself with, like, some really toxic toxic chemicals and induces herself into a coma. They shake the Romulan off. Picard and Soji get along this episode, and that's basically all that happened. This episode was good. Fan service. I give it probably like 7.5 out of 10. I mean, seeing Riker and Troy was really awesome and nice and everything. Definitely a very wholesome episode, just not really action-packed. Hugh did die this episode, which is like, bye Hugh, you were a really loyal, awesome character, and it was so awesome seeing his reunion with Picard. It just, made me happy. Seeing that Hugh is such a nice and loyal guy, and just seeing a friendly face after them all being surrounded by enemies was a breath of fresh air. Unfortunately, Hugh didn't really get to do much. He just kind of got murked by Lieutenant Rizzo, but with his last dying breath, he did give Elnor instructions on how to retake the Borg cube, and then Elnor goes and hits up the Fenris Ranger call tag. In comes 7 of 9. Really awesome. Glad to see her again. I would have been really disappointed if earlier in the season that's all we get to see of 7 of 9. I would have been hella disappointed with that, so I'm so glad that she actually came back. So yeah, 7.5, guys. One thing I would like to mention, though, a lot of people were complaining about earlier in the series how Rafi was referring to Jean-Luc Picard as JL, kind of in an informal sense. You have all these Star Trek boomers getting their panties in a twist, be like, oh man, what the fuck? Jean-Luc Picard would never let anybody use the informal. That's just not the Jean-Luc Picard I know. Alright, so Jean-Luc Picard's transformation into the Jean-Luc Picard we see now is something that I could probably most compare to Sengoku from One Piece. After the Marineford War, Sengoku, his hair got a little bit white and he got a little bit carefree, whereas before he was a stuck-up little bitch who really only cared about his job and his responsibilities. Now, that's not me calling Jean-Luc Picard from the Next Gen a stuck-up bitch, but all I'm saying here is, guys, is that as you progress into your older age, and especially since Jean-Luc Picard isn't even, like, in Starfleet anymore, I'm very surprised as to why people would complain that a personal friend of his, Rafi, would use the informal of JL. Seems like in his old age, he probably has learned to become a little bit more lenient, and that is highly evident by the fact that Riker literally refers to him as Jean-Luc in this episode. And if you remember, there was an episode of The Next Generation where Picard had a huge problem with that. When Riker was given the powers from Q and the Q Continuum, he basically became a god and then started referring to Picard as Jean-Luc, and then Picard was like, I don't remember us coming to a first name basis there, William. So yeah, a really interesting thing to note there. Let's move on to the next episode. Episode 8, Broken Pieces. Damn, was this a good freaking episode, dude. I love this shit. The first thing we get to see is Commodore O basically leading the Admonition, which is a relic left behind by an old civilization that was destroyed because of their pursuit of synthetic life. You basically put your hand on this green glowing bar of energy and you get to see all the memories. It seeps through your head, basically showing you hell, destruction, the worst things you could possibly imagine. Very trippy, very cool. It drives most people who touch the green bar crazy to the point where they want to fucking kill themselves. You learn that the lady who was in, like, the Borg cube who was recovering is actually the aunt of Lieutenant Rizzo and Narek. You learn that after the admonition, she actually went so fucking crazy that when the Borg attempted to assimilate her into the collective, those memories somehow infected the Borg cube and just fucking destroyed it, and I guess that's how we got the Borg cube relic that is now floating in space. I could be wrong about that. That's just kind of my interpretation. We get a lot of answers in this episode. We learn about the Conclave of 8 and how it is a collection of 8 stars, basically an octenary solar system created by some super civilization that was able to move stars, which kind of also implies that possibly the Romulan supernova was not an accident, but perhaps intentional. Something else that was totally intentional we learned this episode is that the Romulans were totally behind the attack on Mars. Rafi is kind of stoked, but also terrified that she was correct all along and that she is not insane. Rafi almost relapses in this episode, by the way, but the computer does not allow her to drink any alcohol. Soji beams aboard the ship. Basically, Chris Rios has a Vietnam flashback as soon as he sees Soji, and this is all going back to events that happened aboard his old starship, the Ibn Majid. This is really cool, by the way. Rafi goes and tries to question Chris Rios herself, tells her to piss off, goes into a room with all the EMHs, and they sit down and have this really awesome and funny conversation, basically trying to get to the root of Chris Rios' psychological problems. You learn that basically Chris Rios was on this ship with his very beloved captain, Captain Alonso Vandermeer, and they have this first contact with these two people from this unknown planet. They get a call from Starfleet that they need to murder those people, and they're just gonna murder everybody. That's basically Commodore Owen, the Zhat Vash, highly manipulating the situation. Alonso Vandermeer, from what we're told, seems like a very good Starfleet captain, seems like he has a high moral standard, so in order to protect the people that he loves aboard his ship, he's forced to actually murder these two individuals that they are having first contact with. When he goes and tells this to Chris Rios doubts him. He's extremely disappointed. He doesn't believe any of this. Alonso Vandermeer kills himself, and Chris Rios learns the truth, basically in this episode, that the two individuals that came aboard the ship that day were synthetic, and that's why they were trying to cover it up, and that was a really awesome and cool twist right there. I love that scene with Rafi and the EMHs in the room, and they're trying to look at the different aspects of his psyche in order to understand his situation better. I thought that was such a great scene, like no cap, that was really good. Also, another thing, I really just need to point out, you know, Star Trek boomers really like to bitch all the time about every little fucking detail. They were really salty about the accents that the EMH produced, saying that it wasn't like an authentic Scottish or Irish accent. I guess Scottish and Irish people are really like sensitive about that. In this episode, they even joke about how like none of the EMHs are actually speaking like the correct languages, and they're all just basically animated cartoonish characters almost. So there you go. They're not meant to be accurate. They're meant to be funny. But you know, the Star Trek boomers, they don't really like to laugh or have fun or anything. They just like to bitch and complain and moan. So more fun for me. I really like the EMHs. 7 of 9 comes in. Really awesome to see her again. As I've stated before, I would have been really disappointed if all we've seen from 7 of 9 is what we've seen from like earlier in the Picard series. I'm so glad that she's back. She's actually got like a greater role and impact. She helps Elnor retake the Borg cube. You could see, by the way, there's a little scene. Lieutenant Rizzo gets overwhelmed by these Borg, and the first couple times I watched this, I thought Lieutenant Rizzo was legitimately assimilated and that she was like down for the count. But if you look extremely closely, you see that at just the last moment she manages to beam out, which is a repeating pattern for Lieutenant Rizzo. She just seems to beam out like just at the right moment. Elnor was about to throw that throwing knife at her before she got like totally fucked. She just beams away. Same thing with the Borg here. Lieutenant Rizzo is a slippery eel. Soji's on board. They have a little bit of a back and forth, like Rafi, Chris Rios. Basically everybody is a little bit suspect of Soji at first. They learn this episode that the Zhat Vash are heading straight for the home planet of the synthetics, and Dr. Agnes Jurati, let me tell you guys, Dr. Agnes Jurati says she's going to jail, but of course that kind of gets postponed because they have to go and save like all of synthetic life over on this planet. You never know, guys. Dr. Agnes Jurati was like really influenced to do what she did. She is technically guilty of murder. Maybe she'll get off the hook, who knows? Probably not. She'll probably die redeeming herself or something. I haven't seen the next episode yet. Like I said, I am forcing myself to go out and make this review before I watch episode 9, which is part 1 of a 2-parter, which is the season finale, and oh my god, am I so fucking hyped to watch it after this. So yeah, this episode, I definitely give it like a 9 for enjoyment. It was super fun. I really enjoyed it. A lot of action, a lot of really good interactions between the crew members. There is one giant plot hole I would like to criticize here, though, that just seems like kind of fucking hilarious to me. Why did they not, when they realized that Bruce Maddox was murdered, okay? Why did they not at any time walk into the medbay and simply scream, "Activate emergency medical hologram program"? It seemed like the EMH dude was like perfectly fine the entire time. Wouldn't the first thing to do, like when somebody dies on board, would be to consult like the head physician of the vessel, which in this case was the EMH, but no, they didn't think to like summon him or anything after Bruce Maddox's death. They just took Dr. Agnes Jurati's word for it, which is insane. As soon as she's revived from her coma, they just fucking turn the EMH back on, and he's like, oh yeah, she murdered him, when they could have just done that like the day before or something. It's absolutely crazy. So yeah, that's just kind of a really quirky plot hole to me that I'd like to mention. Another thing, Star Trek Picard's budget seems to be very limited. I've not seen next episode, but I already see clips of like the Star Trek boomers roasting it for its cheap graphics, which for its cheap and like reused effects or something. I think when CBS gets a little bit more dough in their pockets or something, they need to go and release Star Trek Picard in like a digital remaster where they replace all the shuttles from Discovery with like a new shuttle design, which totally would be possible, by the way. Like, I don't see why they can't go back and do that in some digital remaster of the series. That's the only thing that kind of breaks immersion and kind of shows laziness and cheapness on their part, so I hope in the future they do actually go and fix that. Anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please slap a like on it. If you have anything you'd like to add, please leave it down in the comments below. I will be sure to get back to you. If you're liking the content you see on the channel, I'd be very flattered if you were to subscribe. And with that, I'm gonna have to see you in the next one.